You're listening to Three Kitchens podcast, hosted by home cooks Erin Walker and Heather Dyer.
Join us as we walk you through our experience with a new recipe, successes and fails. Let's all get inspired, cook better, and eat great food. Hello and welcome to Three Kitchens podcast. I'm Erin Walker along with Heather Dyer, and we are inviting a fellow creator today to join us in hosting the podcast. So CJ is joining us. She is an author. She's the creator of A Well Read Tart, a food and book lovers blog, and the co-host of the Dark Side of the Word podcast, a show that explores 4 different book-related topics every month from a writer's perspective. So today CJ is going to lead us through a recipe and share her personal connection to it. So thank you, CJ, for joining us here on the podcast.
Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for having me. I am so happy to be a guest on your podcast. I discovered Three Kitchens a while back through the Women Who Podcast magazine, and I was immediately drawn to the fact that you cater to home chefs or self-taught chefs and bakers, because that is me. I am a self-taught cook. I'm a mostly self-taught baker. And, while I love watching Great British Bake Off and Food Network competitions, I have no desire to do anything over the top and grand with my meals and my bakes. So I'm always looking for something that is simple and tasty, that doesn't require fancy cookware that I don't have, unfamiliar ingredients I will never use again, or crazy professional techniques. So I love that you highlight a lot of accessible, easy recipes, other bloggers and chefs who do the same thing. So it fits right in my wheelhouse. I love it.
Awesome. We do occasionally try like the things that are like way out there. I don't know if you've heard the episode where I talk about attempting macarons.
Oh, God bless you. I have
that was
that's not for me.
Adventure. Yeah.
My husband actually makes macarons and he does it really well. And he's not a trained baker or anything like that, but he makes them and they come out really great. And even if they don't turn out well, I am happy to eat the spoils and just enjoy them, because they always taste good, even if they don't look perfect.
Yeah. And I think most of our listeners can probably relate to that.
That's the joy of baking. Even if it doesn't look super great, you're like, well, it's still sugary and delicious. So
exactly. Exactly. That is why I'm a fan of the naked cake trend, just putting a little bit of icing on and not frosting the sides. That is too much work. After I bake the cake, I don't want to have to make it look like a professional. No, a home baker did this. This is what you're getting. And it's going to be delicious and a little messy, because that's how cooking is.
Yeah, well, you're preaching to the choir here.
We right here with you.
Good. Yeah.
Excellent. So can you tell us a little bit more about your podcast and blog?
Yes. So for A Well Read Tart, it is a book and food lovers blog. And it is a blog I started back in 2018, and I primarily share book reviews and recipes that are inspired by the books I've read. So, for example, I recently posted my book review for Hello Beautiful by Ann Napolitano. I think a lot of people will recognize that title. And later that week, I shared my recipe that was inspired by Hello Beautiful, which happened to be a chicken, chickpea, and quinoa dish. And it was inspired because the chickpeas are one of main character Sylvie's favorite things. And the dish has a lot of Italian-inspired flavor because the main family in the novel is an Italian-American family. I also post about novel writing and blogging on my site to give inspiration to other writers who are in the trenches like I am and trying to make it. And I also post travel diaries when I take a vacation, because it's just fun. And who doesn't like to see pretty pictures of nice places, And you can also get to my book club podcast, Dark Side of the Word, from my blog.
And so what do you guys talk about on Dark Side of the Word?
Well, we originally started as just a monthly book club. So we were just going to read a book each month, discuss it online, and gradually we built out more and more episodes. So now we actually post weekly, and we talk about content recaps of books and TV shows and podcasts that we're recommending. We do writing creative updates, since we're both aspiring novelists, and we also have our own blogs. And we usually discuss some kind of industry trend about writing or publishing. For example, NaNoWriMo is coming up in November, which is National Novel Writing Month. So the pros and cons of doing that, how to successfully query a literary agent, or talking about something like romantasy that has come out when Fourth Wing came out and just broke all the barriers on a new genre. And we try for our book club to do any kind of dark book that's like dark academia, dark thriller, dark horror, but we mostly end up doing horror books because that's our favorite genre. And even though my co-host Kate and I, we both love horror books, we have very different styles of writing and types of books that we prefer. So it is rare that we agree on liking or disliking a book. So it makes for some very entertaining conversations and episodes. But we're still friends and we're still co-hosts, and it works out.
I think we can all relate to that. Talking about things we love with our friends.
Mm-hmm.
And I always say, well, isn't it great that we all love different things? Because wouldn't it be such a boring world if we all just loved exactly the same thing and there would be no conversation because we just agree with each other.
Mm-hmm. Interestingly, our most, I won't say boring episodes, but our least entertaining episodes are the ones where we agree on the book. Either we both hated it or we both loved it, because how much could you really say if you both thought it was an absolutely spectacular work of fiction or completely bombed, you know? But when you have the difference of opinion, that's when you really get into the weeds. So makes for good conversation.
That's what I like about going to a book club too, is if everybody liked the book, I'm like, well, this was kind of a boring week.
Yeah.
If we've got really strong opinions about it, it's way more entertaining.
Drama. There's the drama that it brings.
Exactly. And it's fun to argue and have like a good discussion where you know that nobody's going to come out offended, but you can express opposite opinions.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. It's a safe space. We can talk about what we like, what we don't like. We still mostly respect each other for liking or not liking certain things.
So I'm curious about your blog. How do you decide that, okay, this book is going to inspire a recipe? Do you go in reading the book thinking, yeah, I'm going to build a recipe out of this, and then you're like, I got nothing. Like there's nothing here to inspire. Does it? It
does happen, especially actually with supernatural horror books like I do for the podcast. I am so grateful I don't have to think up recipes for those, because that's probably the hardest genre to think of a related recipe, because there's not any food usually in them. Or if there is, it's in a way you really don't want to think about it, probably, you know? So there are a couple different ways that I go into figuring out a recipe. You know, sometimes in books they mention a dish or an ingredient directly, and that's probably the easiest way. Other books, like with Hello Beautiful, the recipes inspired by events or traditions, locations, cultures. You know, Sylvie loved chickpeas and the Italian American influence, so it has tomatoes, it has basil, oregano, like a lot of fresh herbs. And then a lot of the times there's also just a connection that I make in my head with the food. So there's this thriller I reviewed called Greenwich Park by, I think the author is Catherine Faulkner, and it's takes place in London, and red wine plays a huge part in the novel. So I ended up making coq au vin, which is a red wine chicken dish, and that was how I tied it into the novel. And it also worked because a lot of the main characters in Greenwich Park throw lavish dinner parties, and coq au vin is a great dinner dish for that. So it depends on what I'm reading, what I can come up with. Again, sometimes it's really easy and it's practically handed to me, but I like to make my own little spin on what they suggested in that recipe in the book.
I think that is most often how we cook for our podcast too. It's never exactly the recipe. Well, I mean, once in a while we try to follow it, but inevitably something has to be changed or modified or substituted. And I think that's cooking and baking. You know?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Yeah. I recently just had 5 original recipes published in a companion cookbook for In the Garden of Monsters by Crystal King. And she had given me a list of all the different types of food that appear in this book. This novel is like a foodie fiction feast. And I picked 5 dishes and I kind of tweaked them a little bit, but it was the first time I had fully created truly original recipes. It was hard. It was really, really hard. You don't really think about how much time and energy really goes into full recipe creation.
Yeah. I think that's a whole other skill.
Yeah.
I mean, I certainly don't have, and I think a lot of home cooks and bakers don't.
Yeah.
We also maybe don't aspire to it either.
Yeah,
which is
exactly.
Fine.
Yeah.
So how did you get into cooking, or how did you learn to cook?
I just, I moved out on my own and I got hungry and couldn't afford takeout every night. So I just started cooking. I'd always done some baking. My grandmother was a really great baker. She taught me the basics of like quick breads and cakes and cookies and cream puffs. And so I kind of learned that from her. And then as I got older, I just started baking for fun. And I think I just have a knack for it. I just started bringing stuff into work, to friends' parties, to events, and it just grew from there. And then, I used to post a lot of photos on Facebook of my bakes and my meals, and I was also posting book reviews on Goodreads for a while. And a friend came to me and she's like, I love your book reviews. I love seeing your photos. You should start a blog where you read a book, you review it, and then you do a recipe inspired by what you've read. And I'm like, no, that's a silly idea. I'm not a techie person. I'm not a blogger. And then I kind of thought about it and I was like, that kind of sounds like a fun idea. And I told my husband, and to my equal parts delight and terror, he's like, that's a great idea. And he built me a blog. And a few months later, I was blogging. And 6 years later, here I am still doing it. And I really love it. And it gives me a chance to try lots of different creative things, especially now that I'm getting more confidence as a baker, as a cook, and just share them with people and learn other great techniques and recipes too. I've connected with so many different people, both authors and foodie people and recipe creators. And I've just gotten so much great food and books over the past few years. It's been wonderful.
I love it. I love that your friend was just like, hey, you should do this. And you were like, well,
Yeah.
and it
All
worked.
right. Give it a shot. Yeah. And it worked.
Yeah.
And it
Awesome.
took off. And there's a couple other, blogs and Instagrammers out there who do something similar. But I think when I started, there weren't too many to be found. So it's kind of an interesting niche. It's not just food, not just books. It combines my two loves. So it works out well. I'm no professional by any means. It's like making tasty things for people.
I love
It
that.
always feels good when you learn something new, or you can gauge your skills in
Yes.
anything getting better, and you're like, I actually have learned something. I feel
Yes.
confident in this. The reward of good tasting food at the end just makes it that much better, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. When I made that blood orange tart, that was the first time I'd ever made a tart. And I had worked with a pastry chef friend who told me how to make like a pâte sablé type crust. I kind of incorporated that technique into what I was doing. And I had a successful tart shell. And I was just amazed because a year prior, I would have been too terrified to do that.
I'm not familiar with that technique. Now I'm going to be going and Googling that after just to see what that's about.
Can't get enough things dark and spooky? Check out Dark Side of the Word, a weekly podcast for all the dark story lovers out there. Co-hosts Kate and CJ are two writers and bloggers who love books, movies, and podcasts about haunted houses, dark academics gone rogue, serial killer thrillers, reimagined monsters and myths, and so much more. Tune into their book club discussions and content recommendations, where they weed out the good from the bad and the creepy so you don't have to. Watch Dark Side of the Word on YouTube or listen to the audio-only version on iHeart, Apple, and Spotify.
Well, maybe we should talk about some shrimp and polenta.
I always love
Because
talking about shrimp.
we've been wanting to talk about this one since we tried it.
Hopefully you liked it.
We did,
Okay,
yes.
that is good news.
Okay, so tell us about this recipe that you sent us.
Okay, so paprika shrimp and smoked Gouda polenta. If we're talking in terms of book-inspired recipe, this was the recipe I paired with the book Rush by Lisa Patton, which is a really great Southern fiction novel. It follows three women who are part of sorority life at a college in the American South. And I was never in a sorority. I usually make fun of sororities. I'm sorry if either of you were in a sorority, but
No.
I was not either. I love this book. It was fantastic. It was eye-opening. It was funny. It was heartwarming. It showed you there are a lot actually good things about sororities that you can get behind, but there are also a lot of bad things about them that I did not really know about. It addresses a lot of hard topics, but in a very accessible, light way. So I recommend the book, but the book is set in the South. I think it's Mississippi. And I wanted to create a book inspired recipe that really drew upon Southern cooking. And paprika shrimp with smoked Gouda polenta is my twist on a Southern shrimp and grits. Personally, it is one of my and my husband's favorite dishes. It reminds us of when we went to New Orleans for our honeymoon, and we had a bajillion different shrimp and grits dishes, and all of them were absolutely delicious. But a lot of them were just a little too spicy and a little too smoky for us with the barbecue sauce. So when we returned home, I wanted to make my own version of shrimp and grits. And I am a northern girl. I live in New Jersey, which is in the northeast part of the United States. We don't make grits, we make polenta. So that's where the polenta comes from. And for the shrimp, instead of using fresh peppers or a strong barbecue sauce, because I don't like the vinegar in barbecue sauce, I just decided to use a little bit of butter, some spices, and lemon instead to give it a quick, fresh taste. And it became a hit, and it's now on our monthly dinner rotation.
Okay, so just real quick. Now, you know that we're Canadians
Yes.
and we're in the western part of Canada. So we are
Okay.
on the other end of the continent
Okay. Okay. Gotcha.
and not quite, not all the way over,
But
you know,
not
we're
close enough to the ocean.
not to the
Okay.
ocean.
That's too
We're in
bad.
we're in the prairies, close to the mountains. And so one of the first things I said to Erin was, I'm like, okay, what's because she made the recipe, I'll just say it for the
Okay.
two of us.
Yeah.
What's the difference between polenta and grits? And she's like, well, I don't know. Like, so maybe because I kept saying, are we eating shrimp and grits? Because it just sounds so fun and like it's
Yeah.
something so foreign to us here. So can you tell us what is the difference between the two? Do you know?
I actually don't know. I probably should research that before. But polenta is just cornmeal, like ground up cornmeal that you would use to make cornbread or corn muffins, anything like that. And you just put chicken broth with it and you simmer it together, and then you can add whatever toppings you like. I think grits is a special type of cornmeal. I'm not sure how, but it does take much longer to boil usually. So I think it's a little harder,
Oh, okay.
and it becomes naturally creamier, I think, than
Oh,
cornmeal does, which is why I like to add the cheese to the polenta.
Okay.
So that is the difference. And we don't, I could probably find grits in a store here, but I do hear they take longer to cook. They can be a little bit more finicky, a little bit more gummy. And polenta is just super easy to do. In a couple, like 20 minutes, you got your dish. So that's why I like to use that.
That definitely makes sense.
and then to Erin's other comment, we're not by the ocean. So
Yes.
shrimp is something that we purchase typically frozen.
Same.
That's how you buy it too?
And yeah, unfortunately, I'm about an hour and a half from the ocean. And we do have seafood departments here that sell it fresh or defrosted
Okay.
already, but it's very hard to find quality seafood where I live. So I do a lot
Okay.
of frozen shrimp. I usually do like an organic shrimp. I've gone through a lot of different types. So I use organic frozen shrimp and just defrost them about 30 minutes under warm water before I start cooking. And it works
Okay.
fine every time.
Okay.
I bet if you made this recipe with like coastal South Carolina shrimp or something, it would be absolutely delicious. You would get that really fresh, like slightly sweet flavor from the shrimp, but it's still really good with frozen.
Well, with most things, if the closer you are to the source or the
Yeah.
harvest, or it's going to be better. But
Yeah.
we always wonder, like, how good is the seafood that we get here because we are so far from.
Yeah, I would just say spend the money on quality, like organic or really good quality shrimp.
Okay. So I did take this on, and
Okay.
I will admit it is the first time I have cooked raw shrimp ever.
Oh, okay.
It's never been something that, as a family, we have put on
Mhm.
our menu of things to cook or eat, or, I mean, we will have it when
Okay.
we are out
Yeah.
and somebody else is preparing it for us,
hmm
or shrimp fried rice is my
Yum.
son's favorite side when we go for Chinese food,
Same.
but it's not something that ever comes into our house.
Okay.
Maybe now it will.
I think now it might.
It might.
And I would like to, I need to source my shrimp better because, I'm at the store and I'm looking and, I've got your recipe out of my phone and I'm looking at what's
Yeah.
available. So I'm just grabbing the thing that matches, but I'm not really spending too much time looking around because
hmm
I don't know what I'm looking for.
Yeah, I can
So
see that.
I think, especially for myself and my one son who really loves shrimp, this is going to
Mhm.
be something when it's the two of us, I'll whip up
Mhm.
because I know he will love this.
Okay.
He saw the
Yeah.
recipe sitting on the counter and he was quite upset that I did not share any.
Oh.
He shared it with me.
Yeah.
We shared.
I halved the recipe that you gave
Okay.
and just made enough for Heather and myself to have. And so he was like, "Did you cook shrimp? Did you not share? Did you save some?" I was like, "Well,
How
no."
could
"Well, is it for
you?"
dinner?" "No." Oh. I said, "I'll make it for you another time because actually I think you'll really like it."
Erin made it and then ran it over to my house
Yes.
warm.
Oh,
for my
nice.
lunch. She
Nice.
ran up to my door. She still had her apron on. I actually have
Yeah.
a little video because it was so cute. I saw her coming and I'm like,
I
here comes
love
Erin in
that.
her apron. I'm going to post
Food
it on.
delivery service.
Yeah,
I love that.
exactly.
That's the
Yeah.
best part of this job, let me tell you.
Yes.
I actually really like that you mentioned that you only usually have shrimp when you're out somewhere, because that's one of the reasons I love this recipe. So many people think cooking seafood and shrimp is either difficult or a really fancy meal, but I feel it doesn't have to be that way. We cook a lot of shrimp in my house, and this meal is just, it's so simple and it takes only 20 minutes. And I feel like it's good for a weeknight dinner, but it's also a little fancy to serve to company. And you can adjust it so many different ways for dietary needs, for just your different tastes. And I think it's just a great meal to show that it doesn't have to be a restaurant only food. Once you learn to get the right shrimp and cook it the way that you prefer, which is another big thing. I like my shrimp a little on the overdone side. My husband likes it a little bit more on the underdone, not underdone because that's unsafe, but a little bit more of the classic way, I guess. So once you discover the way you like to cook shrimp, that's when it really becomes something you'll want to make on your own at home.
And that's something that I feel like I don't know anything about. It's such a new and different ingredient for me. I was watching that pan like a hawk. I'm watching it and I was like, is it opaque yet? Does it look pink yet? Well, if I add in paprika to this, it's going to change
It's going to be
color.
pink. Yep. And how am I supposed to know? Yes.
It was really fun trying to figure out. And so I made the shrimp part in 2 batches. So
Okay.
I'll start with the polenta, which was stupid easy to make. Like I couldn't believe how fast it all came together.
Yeah.
Some of the chicken broth went in with the cornmeal, and then you get your second amount of chicken broth, cooking away in your pot, and you just dump it in, stir it around,
swirl, swirl. Easy peasy.
It was like 2 or 3 minutes and it was done. It was so quick to make up. And then you take it off, toss in your cheese, and you've got this deliciously creamy. Oh my goodness. Both Heather and I were like, this polenta, oh my gosh.
So
Because I've
good.
made like a harder polenta bar or something a little more dense.
Okay. Yeah.
And those are fantastic. I love having that as a side. And we had like a little bit of a red pepper salsa.
Relish type thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was really good. But this like warm and gooey and scoopable and
It's like comfort food, like a big bowl of mashed potatoes or something.
Yeah. I think if you like mashed potatoes or risotto,
Yes.
you're gonna love this. It was
Absolutely.
it was so good.
Absolutely. And I have made it with the smoked Gouda, obviously, but I've also made it with just Pecorino Romano or Asiago, cheddar, Havarti. I've even made a non-cheese version because my husband, sometimes we go back and forth with eating dairy with just lots of fresh chopped herbs like rosemary or basil. And it just infuses everything. And it's so good. I usually add a little bit more salt when I cook if I don't add the cheese, because the cheese will add its own saltiness. But it's still so good either way. You can really just play it up however you like it. More pepper, more cheese. And again, the cheese is like just a suggested amount. You can put in double that. That's not wrong.
I feel like I was pretty liberal with my cheese. It was whatever. I had like the Gouda block and I was like, all right.
I thought it was a very nice amount of cheese. Like it was like, you could see it was like gooey and like it was definitely the flavor of cheese. Oh,
Goody. I'm glad
yum.
you liked it.
So then once I got that polenta finished up, I just popped the lid on and popped it in my oven and turned it on warm and hold function. Whatever that is in my oven, it just sat in there perfectly. And then it allowed me the time to focus on cooking the shrimp. So I really loved your recipe and how it had the prep instructions before it had the cooking instructions.
Oh, good.
And we've come across this before, where if you don't really have everything prepped and ready to go, especially with something that's really quick cooking,
Rude.
you all of a sudden are like, fuck.
Yeah. Oh, thank goodness. I'm so glad you swear on this podcast, because I'm from Jersey and I have a potty mouth and I have just been holding myself back.
No, don't hold yourself.
No. I'm like, they're Canadian. They're polite. You have to be nice and polite.
Oh, no. You just be yourself, please.
Well, fuck, then I will.
Good.
So we've definitely done that to ourselves before, where you're like, well, now I need to start all over because my garlic is black.
Yeah.
Or whatever's in the pan has gone to shit. So having those prep instructions is a really good alert to me to be like, be ready because this is going to go fast.
Yes, yes. I try to do that for all my recipes because I am the same way. I don't want to be in a recipe in the middle of it and be like, oh crap, I forgot to do this and now I have to do this. And then you're running around, something burns and you got to start all over, you know? So
Yeah.
I do that for every recipe, do it for the baking ones too. It's just, I like being organized too. It makes cleanup easier at the end. And this way, at the end of a long day, all you have to do is follow the instructions and you have a meal. You don't have to think, just follow.
Right.
Yeah, and I also find, especially with baking, I take out all the stuff I'm going to need
Hmm.
and put it on the counter. And
Yes.
then as I put in baking powder or whatever, I put it back in my
Yes.
pantry. And then that way I know that first of all, I know I have all the ingredients when I start. I'm not going to be like, get halfway through and realize I don't have baking soda or whatever. And
Yeah.
then it's tidied up as I go and it's all put back away. And then,
You know you haven't forgotten something.
yes, that too.
And that you haven't doubled something by accident. I
Oh.
make a taco seasoning and I have been known to confuse the chili powder with paprika and double the chili powder because I forget to put it to the side where like ingredients I've already used.
Yeah.
And that taco is a wake-up call. So yes,
Yeah.
having it be organized and prepped and move stuff off to the side, put it back in your pantry is a great way to make sure you adhere to the recipe you're trying to follow.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I got everything prepped and ready to go. So I was
Great.
ready to just focus on that shrimp. I
Yeah.
cooked it partially through just my laser vision.
I can believe that. Yeah.
So it went really, really well. I loved how simple the just paprika, onion powder, and then adding that splash of lemon juice in at the end.
Yes.
It just, the flavors were right there. I'm not 100% happy with how the shrimp texture turned out.
Yeah.
That's going to be my biggest question is how do I get my shrimp so that it's not so crunchy?
Oh, we got to crunchy. Okay. Okay.
I felt like it was a little bit poppy as I was chewing it, right? It popped or
Okay.
crunched.
Yeah. That might have gone a little too far, a little too hard.
Okay.
So you probably like your shrimp a little bit on the lighter side. For me, texture is a very big thing when I'm eating. If I don't like the texture of something, I will not eat it. It doesn't matter how good it's supposed to be. No, thank you.
Yep.
And so my suggestion to you is cook it about 3 minutes. And again, it also depends on how high you have your heat and how much of a flame you have under your pan. You know, one side turns pink, the other side starts to turn pink after about a minute. It's probably cooked through. Take your fork, cut in half, see if it cuts easily, and see if you just try it. That's what I do too. I just take a bite and I see if I like it or not.
Okay.
If it's not cooked all the way, you will know very quickly and you will spit it out. And if it
Okay.
is cooked, you'll be like, oh, this is nice, but it could do a little more. I don't like the texture. Or you can be like, you know what, this is perfect. So I think it really is a personal preference. Taste as you go. Just make sure it's, you know, mostly cooked about 2 or 3 minutes. If they're small shrimp, if you get the big honkin' shrimp, it's going to take longer, obviously, but start with the little shrimp, which take like 3 seconds to cook. So yeah,
Okay.
it's finicky with shrimp, the cooking time.
Yeah. How long do you think you cooked it, Erin? Did you note how long?
Okay, let's me
It's
go
okay
back.
if you didn't, because I often don't make those notes.
I probably cooked it closer to like 5 to 7 minutes altogether.
Big
And
were your shrimp?
I had like medium sized,
Okay.
Yeah, they were, you know,
medium. I mean, it
Shrimp.
was,
yeah.
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 Okay.
This is the first
Yes.
time I have ever handled raw shrimp. Yes, I am from the dirt
It's
ball
fine.
prairies.
That's
I know.
okay.
It's okay.
That's all right. I made a roast chicken for the first time this year. So I understand. It's weird. It's weird doing raw stuff with raw food.
It's a new place to go to. And
Well, and also when you
I
don't
love
eat
it.
it often,
Yeah.
you maybe haven't figured out exactly what that doneness
Yeah.
level is that appeals to you, right?
yeah.
Yeah, a lot of professional chefs will say 2, 3 minutes, you're done with the shrimp. And to me, that feels a little like taking a risk with food poisoning. And for me also, I don't like that texture. I don't like that crunch to it too. That's still a little bit raw. It can be, see if it's too raw, it can be crunchy. If it's overcooked, it can be a little crunchy in a way because you got the edges crunchy too. So just
Okay.
try and see. Try and see is my best advice, because that's what I do basically, you know.
So it
This
sounds
is
like probably
good.
it was a little on the overdone end.
I
Mhm.
think it was a little on the overdone end,
I'll bet.
probably.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. I know Erin and I had a conversation. Lately we've been pulling up at the school for pickup at the same time, and we line up our vehicles so that we can chit chat from our
Roll down
drive.
Mhm.
that window and
Yeah.
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 Don't even have to
And
get out anymore. It's brilliant.
yeah, and so I pull in the other day and Erin's like, "Okay, shrimp. How
Yes. What about
what
them?
did you think of it? Did I cook it right?" And I was like, "Well, I mean, I don't eat a ton of shrimp either, and I don't cook a lot of shrimp. I have cooked shrimp, but not a lot. Even
Yeah.
though my family does really love shrimp, and I really should
Mhm.
make it more." And I was like, I thought it was good. It was. I understand what you mean by crunchy. I think it was just slightly overdone, but not like crazy overdone.
Yeah.
Okay.
I thought you did well with it, considering you've never
Yeah.
cooked it before. I thought you did great. Yeah.
Yeah. It's something to practice at. Shrimp can be so finicky. So if you play around with it, try different.
This has been good to start me out because I don't think I ever had a recipe that I was like, oh, I really want to make that because I haven't eaten a
Mhm.
lot. And most of what I've had, I'm like, well, I'll never be able to make that. Like, I'm not going and deep
Yeah.
frying nothing or,
Oh no, I'm not
like
doing that
Yeah.
either. Mm-mm.
all the different ways that I've had shrimp eating out is never a way that I would want to try and replicate at
Yeah.
home.
Yeah.
But this now is something that I'm like, I liked these flavors. I want to change it up a bit. And I have
Yeah.
my kid who's on me about not
Yeah.
sharing. So
So you have a reason to try it again and get his feedback on what he thinks shrimp.
the next time I
Hmm.
cook it, I'm going to include him with it so that we
Yeah.
can stand around the pan and figure
Yes.
this out. Because it's good to know that I can kind of like test as I go and figure out
Yeah.
that done point and look at what kind of shrimp I end up buying next time too. So
Yeah, definitely.
thank you for putting me onto something new because
No
I
problem.
love being pushed outside of my comfort zone, and this was a really good nudge. So
That's good. It's so funny because this recipe, when I cook this dish, I probably make it once or twice a month at home. I don't use a recipe. I just I just throw everything in a pan and I kind of tweak it depending on how we're feeling. Do we want more onion powder? Do we want more paprika? Do we want just everything drenched with lemon? You know, so I never really, and I just look at it, I'm like, okay, I think it's done. And I don't really think about it. So having to
yes,
think about it is more difficult. So it just takes a little finessing, a little practicing, but it's absolutely doable at home, and you can
Mhm.
make a shrimp dish that you love without having to go out for it.
Absolutely. And we
Hmm.
kind of, we were talking about this recently with someone where even though baking is more specific and very
Mhm.
structured in how you
Yeah.
make it, cooking can be so much more intimidating because there's those little factors of cooking it to when you like it. And
Yeah.
just because you like it at a certain way doesn't mean you know how to get there. And
Yep.
there's so many different ways to go about it with high heat, low heat,
Hmm.
the size of
Right.
things. It's
Yeah.
so challenging to sometimes jump into cooking, and you have to develop your comfort with your ingredients, and it just takes time, and it takes a lot of like
Trial
this
and error.
this is dry today, or this is overcooked, or I didn't quite hit the mark on this one, and you just have to accept it and then remember the next time you
Or
use that
make a note.
ingredient
Yes,
Make
make a
notes.
note.
and make many
Yeah.
notes.
Make many notes. My recipe print, I print out recipes and I scribble things on them all the time.
Yeah. I write
Yeah.
all over my cookbooks. I write all
Yeah,
over everything
totally.
because, this, I'm pointing at my head. It doesn't hold anything.
No,
Well,
it
and
doesn't.
how many recipes say to taste, especially with seasoning, to
Yeah.
taste? It's like to someone who doesn't have a lot of experience,
Yeah.
maybe with whatever's in that recipe, it's like, well,
Yeah.
to what taste? Like, how do I
Yeah.
know?
The first time you make it, you
Yeah,
need to
yeah.
have at least a ballpark of
Yeah.
what you're going for. Like, give me a measurement. I can adjust it
Start
maybe next
with.
time,
Yeah.
Yeah.
but I need that starting point. Yeah.
Exactly. I don't cook with a lot of salt naturally.
Mhm.
And for this recipe, I put what I thought was a good baseline for salt in there, but I
Mhm.
still think probably other people would want even more salt because, and also your shrimp can be very salty. I've gotten frozen shrimp that are extremely salty. So I don't want to say put it like 2 teaspoons of salt because then you're just basically going to eat an ocean for dinner if the shrimp are too salty. salty.
I feel like I never even considered that shrimp might be salty. Like,
Yeah.
I'm serious.
You don't until you get a
Oh
really
my
salty
God.
shrimp and you're like, holy
Dig
fuck,
me
what
out
just
of
happened to
the
this?
rock I am under. But I just like put the pieces together of you live in the salt water, you might taste salty. Good
Yeah.
grief.
Mm.
A good quality shrimp, I don't think should be salty. It should be sweet. It should be fresh. Should have a very light flavor. Or if you can afford it, wild caught, organic. I'm trying to switch to more organic things because of all the stuff I keep reading, but as one's budget allows.
Exactly.
Right.
I love all the things that seem so obvious after I am told them.
Story of my life, yes.
It's great to learn every day just how much I don't know. I love it.
Well, this has been a lot of fun and
Yes.
delicious. Everybody go and make CJ's shrimp and polenta recipe because it's so good.
If I can do it,
Especially love the polenta. I'm going to be like making that a regular thing.
That's a really good side dish for a lot of different things. Plus, you can make it in advance and you don't got to worry about it. And then if you put it in the fridge, it's going to separate a little bit. You drain off the water with a spoon and then you just mix it and then heat it, mix it, heat it, mix it. Boom, you're done. No one will know the difference.
Oh, okay. Good tips.
Yeah.
beautiful. Well, we will link to your
Thank
recipe
you.
on your blog for our listeners
Thank
so they
you.
can go and find it. Can you remind us again how frequently your podcast comes out and where listeners can find you, follow you, and get in touch?
So the blog Well Read Tart, I post twice a week on Tuesdays and Fridays. Usually Tuesday is the book review and Fridays is the recipe. And then for the podcast, we post every week, but the book club episode is usually the last Thursday of the month.
Okay,
Cool.
excellent.
We will put all the links in the show notes. So listener, just scroll on down and click those links and go and check out all the good food and the books. If you love all those things as much as we do, you'll be very happy today that we introduced you to CJ.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been so fun to talk with you about food, about books, and just about the steps to making the recipe. And like I said, I make it so often for myself, I never really think about it so much. So it was nice to take a deeper dive into it and what goes into creating it.
Nice.
Excellent. And now for the fine print. For links to recipes and many other random things we talked about in this episode, check out the show notes or our website, www.threekitchenspodcast.com. Join us over on Instagram, Facebook, Threads, YouTube, and TikTok to see what we're cooking up next. And if you love the show, tell a friend. Word of mouth is the #1 way people learn about new podcasts. Thank you so much for listening. He knows that you have your cat headphones on. He was like, oh, it's my people.